Welcome to Sins and Suffers Podcast. I am your host, Mario Stanley. First and foremost, I want to thank my sponsors, Organic Climbing. If you trust yourself to boulder, well, why don't you put something that has more trust than you in your own skills? And that is a solid crash pad from Organic Climbing. Trust the OGs, the real Gs, the 1Gs. But go on over, get yourself a crash pad, get yourself a chalk bucket. Their drip is unreal. Talk about color, talk about fabulous swag and style. Anyway, that's my rant about that. So this might sound a little different than normal. I'm just getting on the mic and chatting it up, letting you guys know what's going on. That is because I recently had a massive hard drive failure. So all my original B music and everything I had is gone. So we're creating something new for the new year. So for now, you're just going to hear me get on here and chat for a hot couple seconds. Well, let's get into the episode today. Today, my guest is Luke, editor, creator, founder of the Climbing Zine. And him and I have been fanboying on each other for quite a while. This conversation is a long conversation coming. We chat, we bromance, we hang out, and we talk about some projects that we're both working on and where we're going to the future. I will say, Luke kind of tricked me in this one and got me to answer more questions about myself and what's been going on with me more than I got with him. So Luke, next time we get together, the tables are turned. Enjoy the episode.
All right, so I'm not going to assume that my audience knows who you are, because in my personal opinion, you are kind of like this like silent goat that if you're in climbing, people know who you are, Luke. Because like once you get far enough into the climbing world, especially in the literature world, your name pops up. And especially when I early started climbing, when I first ordered your ever copy, I felt like once I saw your face and heard your name, I realized I'd heard you more. So I'm not going to assume everybody knows who you are. Mm-hmm. So who are you? Where are you from? And what is your connection to, the great outdoors?
Yeah, no, everyone doesn't know who I am. My name is Luke Mehall. I'm the publisher of the Climbing Zine and host of the Dirtbag State of Mind podcast. And what was the third question?
Yeah, what's your connection? Like, you were a rock climber, mountain biker, hiker. Like,
mm-hmm.
How did you get into being outdoors?
Yeah. So I'm a climber, identify as a climber, and then I'm also, running and mountain biking are also very important to me, but I don't like want to hang out with mountain bikers and runners. Just kidding. But no, I mean, I think the outdoors literally saved my life from ending up in jail or dead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I truly feel that way. And but I got turned on to the outdoors really in Minnesota at a family camp that my parents would take me to. And there was mountain biking, there was horseback riding, archery, and my favorite thing was the high ropes course that they had there. And so, yeah, that's how I got turned on. And then, kind of went through some rough mental health crisis in my late teens, and then emerged and got turned into rock climbing in a climbing gym and a little bit outside in Illinois, and then landed in Colorado when I was about 20 years old. And then it was over after that, but oh yeah.
That's awesome. I honestly didn't know that was like how you got into it. It's just like, you're just so prolific in the sport. I just assumed that you just basically been growing up and doing this your whole life. I mean, real quick, do you mind kind of elaborating on the part, like you said it with such earnest, and like I hear people say like rock climbing saved my life. Like I've said it before, but I mean it in this kind of way where it's like, me as a black man in America, like I really, especially growing up, there's really two paths for me. Like, I was going to be in jail at some point in time, get in trouble, or do this. Like I was telling Taylor yesterday, like I'll never forget, I had a high school teacher, like, nothing against anybody. This is your career path. This is what you do. That's it. But like, I just knew I wanted to do something different with my life. But I remember a teacher was like, you should try and get a job at Walmart or some kind of grocery store and really like work your way up to management level. Cause honestly, that's probably the best that's ever going to happen for you. And I remember looking at a teacher telling me that point blank in my face. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you don't know me. You have no idea who I am. Mm-hmm. And, and so I would say climbing kind of saved my life, because I wasn't on a bad path, but I was going nowhere really fast. and it was definitely hard. But when you said that statement, there was such a level of earnest in your eyes that I was just kind of curious. Can you kind of, if you're okay with it, can you kind of elaborate? Like, what was actually happening that makes you say that statement?
Of course, yeah. So I think it's similar to many young people, what many young people go through. I was an ADD type student, and um, really, I think the only way they got me, my mother's an educator, English teacher, so the writing stuff is in my bones, but I just was ADD medicated, and for me, mixing that with then cigarettes and how people drink in college and other substances, I had zero exercise at that time, and I just had all these substances going through my body, and I fell into a deep mental health crisis that um I was really only able to get out of once I was exercising regularly, and then quit doing the ADD drugs, and quit smoking cigarettes, and quit drinking 6 Mountain Dews a day. So yeah, and I am very open about it, because I think of anything I've written, I get the most feedback from people who are younger, and not younger, but just people who are going through mental health crises, and I just it was really hard. It took me a long time to write about it after it happened. I'm amazed by writers who are able to process in the moment and talk about the hard things. Like Cat, really, I want to talk about with Cat, with you later, Cat Runner. I was very impressed with his presentation the other night.
Yeah.
But it took me probably a good 10, 12 years to even write about it and talk about it. So
Do you find that, do you get a lot of outpouring of people kind of like really relating from the magazine?
yeah, and it's more from, especially the book I wrote, American Climber.
Oh,
I've
really?
written a lot of things. We're talking about writing before we turn the mics on, and writing is just such a, it takes a lot. And
Yeah.
That piece of writing that I did, that book, American Climber, has just resonated with readers more than anything I've written. And I think it's because I was honest, and then other people go through it, and then how climbing can really help our mental health in so many profound ways. And you know, um, yeah.
No, I'm on par with you. I think, I mean, it's kind of like, I think it's very classic. Like, I think pushing yourself. We had did a clinic a couple days ago, and someone even talked about, and I forget exactly what the science was. I need to look this up. And if anyone's listening to this and you do know the science between this, drop it in the comments. But apparently, there is a part of your brain that physically grows more dense as you learn how to do things you don't want to do, and not so much things that are hard for you, but like you really push yourself beyond barriers, and you push yourself, like, whether it's good or bad for you. And sorry, what if it's something good for you to do, but it does help your brain grow and helps you grow stronger. But like you really kind of have to persevere through that. And I think climbing is this kind of like this natural thing that like helps that side of you, or helps this courageous, emotional, and allows you to honestly, I don't know. I mean, it might not be true for everybody, but I think it, I definitely think that part helps. I think it definitely does that when whatever that part of your brain is. But I also think, I know at least for climbing, I think climbing helped me hugely with like emotional literacy and emotional intelligence, because I actually finally had to really start getting like, in order for me to push the climbs, the grades, just the styles of climb that I like to do, like I really kind of had to learn how to be present with myself and understand where I am in the moment, because I've taken some pretty nasty falls, but I'm very lucky that I've walked away from them. And I'll never forget, fell on this route. Uh, I think it's called Jupiter in Quartz Mountain in
Oklahoma.
Yeah, in
Uh-huh.
Oklahoma.
Uh-huh.
And if you're familiar with Quartz, we call it like the Yosemite of the South.
I know they love it. I know the Oklahoma
dude,
climbers have so much love for it. Yeah,
it's the best.
And maybe some Texas climbers too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, it teaches you, it's a place that teaches you how to be bold. And like, Jupiter is like 11, I think it's Jupiter Symphony or something like that. But it goes at like 11C, 11B. And it's like 4 cam placements. And then it's like 80, 90 feet run out of 11 climbing. And so like, I'll never forget, like I fell a couple feet above. I think I fell and slid like 12, 13 feet. And I just remember like catching that and watching this number 4 like slide, and catch. And then it was at that moment that I remember I was like, I'm not being honest with myself of like where I am
Mm.
being able to do this. And
Mhm.
so I love what you just said about like, you know, how climbing really just allowed you to grow and allowed you to do that. But I definitely think the sport is unique in that way.
Yeah, the mental challenge, and I think that um, I could say the same thing. You know, I remember being on Devil's Tower shortly after all this happened, and I was kind of like finally getting my life back. And you know, like I don't know if you've ever been in this state, but I think when you are like suicidal and you have suicidal thoughts for so long, that manifests in your brain. And I'm sure there's a lot of science behind that too, of how much that fucks up your brain. But yeah, coming out of it, I just remember I was at Devil's Tower and climbed. It was like a 5'8" crack. Like I was so intimidated by multi-pitch climbing. I remember when I first started, I wasn't afraid of heights, but something about multi-pitch, I just thought if you did the multi-pitch, you were the most brave person in the world. And right as I was getting over that, you know, we all have our friends that push us. And I just remember doing this route solar on Devil's Tower. Have you climbed Devil's Tower?
No, it's something I've been desperate to do for years. It's
Yeah.
always been on my bucket list.
Bear Lodge, I guess, is one of the many indigenous names of it too, which I think there's Devil's Tower is a terrible name for such a spiritual place. But yeah, I just did this 5'8" crack, and I obviously probably felt some of the spiritual energy that is in that place. And just, you know, so much prayer and everything that's been offered. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, but I did this 5'8" crack, and I just had this, like, got to the belay, and I just like bawled. It was just like, all right, like it's life is on again, and life is gonna can be really, really, really beautiful. Like I feel like the contrast of those high moments with like 6 months, a year of maybe not wanting to live, you know, like the contrast of that was just like still blows me away to this day, you know, 24 years after the experience.
Well, I mean, I can honestly say I have not been in that position. The only thing that climbing's allowed me to do.
I'm glad.
Yeah, you know, I'm happy, but at the same time, like, you know, and this is nowhere near remotely close to that. But like, I think the only thing that coming close to that is like, I remember shortly after getting divorced, like I was just kind of climbing, and you know, obviously, like it's a traumatic experience, and I don't wish that on my worst enemy. But I just remember kind of walking around, and I remember it was. I remember I was walking around Texas, and this is when I was kind of like doing my, I guess for the lack of a better word, kind of like a spiritual journey of hiking around Texas, finding climbs and finding things to do, and really just searching for new routes to develop, new things to bolt. And I remember just like hiking up at the top of this thing, rapping down, and I remember just like at one point, I'm just like looking at this route. I'm like, oh, this thing is amazing. This is gonna be good. This is that. And then I like came down, and I finally looked at look at wanting to bolt the route, and I'm like getting ready to get all my stuff together. And then I just had this like overwhelming feeling of like just like, well, I'm not really the person to bolt this route. I'm not really the person to do this. And that's that. And I never really felt like that. And then I noticed it happened for this route. And then it happened for like 2 other routes. And it was one of those moments where like, okay, I love this sport so much. And anyone who knows me, like if I put a drill in my hand, I am like giddy, like a child.
Me too.
I'm like ready to go.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment that I realized like, holy shit, I'm depressed. And I was just like, cause I couldn't figure it out. And I was talking to my mom, and I was talking to my mom, and I was trying to explain it to her. And I was talking to my dad, and I was trying to explain it to her. I'll never forget what my dad said to me. He's like, son, you know, it's just okay not to be happy. And I like never mentioned anything about being depressed. I never mentioned anything about like this, but he just was like, you know, son, it's okay just not to be happy. And I was like, well, no, I love this. He was like, well, you're obviously not enjoying it. And it just took me back. And I'm like getting a little teary-eyed thinking about it now. But it honestly just took me back. And it took me a moment to like really recognize. And I was like, am I depressed? And, you know, stereotypically, I kind of always had this feeling in my mind. I'm like, Black people rarely get depressed. We are so oppressed in so many other ways that, you know, depression for us is like a sprinkle on a cupcake, and then the rest and then we just kind of get over it. And it probably took me, honestly, probably took me the better part of almost a year to really kind of kind of like correction. You don't ever go over, around. You only go. A friend of mine, Taylor Reedy, aka the Sastre. I'll never forget what she told me. She's like, you don't go over, you don't go around. You only go through your feelings, and like that's like you just have to go through it. And it took me quite a while to honestly figure out how to go through with it. And I don't think it really started happening until I started like hanging out with like Mike Kleins, Carl, a lot of the older bolters and developers and that. And then big hats off to Jeremy Collins, because I'll never forget Jeremy Collins told me, and he was just like, because he had gone through a divorce prior to that. And I was also talking to, I cannot remember his name. He's been a guest on my podcast. He started Horseshoe Hell. It'll come to me in a minute. Hey, you know who you are if you're listening. I'm sorry, but I love you. But I never forget. I'm like in a cabin in Arkansas with both of these guys, and and I'm like talking to people, and all of a sudden I remember both of them saying, it's okay to like miss your ex-wife. It's okay to like it's the most gut-wrenching feeling ever. And I just remember like lying down in the cabin later on in Sam's Throne in Arkansas, just like lying back. And it wasn't until like hanging out with all of these guys that I want to say, I don't remember it was like this moment of me crying or anything like that, but I just remember waking up feeling like I had broken something, but I also feel like something was kind of released. And I feel like that's kind of how that happens. So I think climbing allows you to kind of like, maybe this is the wrong way to say it or the right way, but it's the only way I know how to. Climbing allows your mind to transcend into different areas and work on things, while your body and your consciousness and your primary consciousness is like working on the thing in front of you, because you have to. But like, yeah, that's just something that it pops in my head.
Well, as usual, you're making me. We were joking before we turned the mics on. We always go in different directions whenever we've chatted, and this recording is like 3 years coming. But you're making me realize a couple of things. One, it makes us be honest with ourselves, and I think that's why I feel like I've always embraced mediocrity in climbing, because even when you're being mediocre, it feels pretty glorious.
Yeah.
But I think also as people who create, for lack of a better word, content, and stories are better, climbing is almost portrayed in this way of something like you're glorious, you're happy. Like if you look at the way it's portrayed on Instagram by professional climbers,
Oh yeah,
it's completely different in reality.
Yeah, I would agree. 100%. 100%.
Like we're both talking about climbing experiences where we're going through something personal, and it wasn't like we climbed something, but it was just that we're on the path, and this combination of being outside, this combination of what challenging us with climbing, and then also our partners, like all those factors illuminate what's really going on. And that's why we're pursuing climbing, and we're not pursuing climbing for that imagery like the way it is almost portrayed today in a lot of ways.
It's funny. This kind of is a beautiful segue into like, this is kind of like one of the things, and I don't know if I've talked to you about this before, but I was talking to Chris a lot about it from the Enormocast yesterday at the Lander Bar. And he was like, what's your thought on climbing media? And I'm like, honestly, outside of certain podcasts, but for most of it just like most of it I'm just infuriated with. And it's not because I don't think it's bad. I think honestly the quality of the climbing media, like the production value, the quality, all of it has skyrocketed. It's never been better. I think the problem is to me, most climbing media, especially visual media, videos, is like, it's just climbing porn. It's one of three things. Like someone goes somewhere and climbs something hard, someone goes somewhere really far away, climbs something hard, and someone goes something really far away, climbs something hard, fails at it, and comes back a few years later and sends it. And I feel like to me, what I see is that. And it's like, don't get me wrong, there are these sprinkles of stories that are really genuine. I love stories that talk about like, affinity groups. I love stories that talk about like LOCs. I love stories that talk about like the heritage of crags and different things like that. But I feel like that's not the bulk of climbing media being made. And even climbing podcasts. Most climbing podcasts are talking about like one of three things, like how to climb harder, this climb that you did, or it's like, talking about something like, like something that Alex Honnold, Chris Sharma, or these guys are just this big climb that they're working up to do. And what I really want to hear more is about like the humanity side in climbing. And that's what I've really geared my podcast to. But I like knowing about you because I want to feel like I'm more connected to you as a person. I don't want to look at you like you're some figure on Mount Olympus really far away. Like I don't care about that. Like that just, it doesn't, to me, I don't know. It doesn't bring value to our sport. And it honestly, in my opinion, it doesn't embody like, it doesn't embody the intimacy that our sport brings, especially like when you're on the wall or you're with a partner or even someone spotting you, you're doing something like, it just doesn't embody the intimacy, and it doesn't allow for that, like the share. When you're just looking at something that's like amazing that someone climbed, like there's no connection to that. It's like, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I love hip hop. It's one of the reasons why I love lyrical rap music. Like I listen to these things and they use these, double or triple entendres that like just, but there's these things that catch to my life, and I'm like, oh, I figure out, like I can figure these things out, or I hear them and I'm like, oh, that's amazing. I get that. I've had this experience in my life, or I've had life experience that allows me to connect to that. And I guess that's all I want to see more in media. I want to see more connection. I feel like you do a really great job of that in the zine. Like I've loved pretty much every issue that I've had a chance to read, and everyone that I've ever met is like, that's read the zine is pretty diehard fan of it, because they're like, this is truly what the essence of like climbing is, comparison to the larger publications and what's put out.
Yeah, we do have that, and it's what keeps the zine going. I mean, I think if people follow our platform, it's like there's definitely some struggles right now with the increase, price. Print has quadrupled. Like my orders have quadrupled. Like how much it costs to print it.
Oh yeah.
And all these different things. But yeah, the core audience, like it is in seeing it at the Climbers Festival, is just incredible. I want to go back to, well, one, shout out to Chris Kalous, because he's like number one supporter of the climbing zine. Like if you listen to old Enormocast, he was constantly giving it shout outs, and I think he kind of changed the game a bit as like a one man show.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
Like he was the OG climbing podcast. I think that's fair to say, and I think he walks the line of, I think he almost changes how I feel about people sometimes. Like I think
I could see that.
You know what I mean? Like back in the day, I mean, we're pretty similar in age, right? You're in your 40s.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just turned 40.
Yeah. So you, welcome.
Yep, I'm happy to be here. Yeah. 39 sucks. So I'm happy to get across the hill.
Right on. But getting back to what you said, like climbing porn, like we don't really use, that term is used all the time. And in some ways it's correct, but like, we don't use that. Like, I think climbing is becoming more like other sports, and we don't like, we see a picture of like LeBron dunking on somebody. We don't call it basketball porn.
True.
Like, what do you think we are becoming? Well, one, let's like dissect that, because why do we use climbing porn? Like, why do we use that?
Okay. So I use it because of, I'll use it this way, because of, this is a little personal, but I use it because I feel like climbing media has not elevated at the same pace that as media as a whole, like the media engine as a whole has not elevated at the same pace. And maybe it's the stuff I'm consuming, but it has not elevated at the same pace that climbing is elevating. And so like the most popular climbing channel on the internet is still Mellow. I think Mellow is great. Mm-hmm. I primarily watch Mellow just for the locations, but I don't want to watch another Mellow video. Like I would like to know more about that. I think sometimes they make things, I think some of the films that's submitted to them is more story based and is more about the person doing the route than it is. It's this weird catch-22. Like, I care more about the person doing the route, and I get that the person doing the route is really important to them, but I would love to dig into them more and understand, their rags to riches, their golden fleece, like, their redemption story, like that brought them to this moment. Maybe not the moment of necessarily climbing the route, but like what brought them to the moment that they thought they could do this magnificent feat. I think that story is far more important than just starting in the moment of the action and giving a sprinkle of backstory and then doing the route. Like the rest of it, like
about like, why do we call it climbing porn though? Like I'm almost like fixing it because I've never like analyzed this, you know?
No, and I get that, and I just I think I use it because like porn is so prolific. There's like, you know, it's the backbone of the dark side of the internet.
Yeah.
And I think the backbone of climbing is just watching people rock climb. And so that's why I call it that.
Yeah, no, and I get it, but like, why is there even a problem with that? You know, like we don't like.
I just see it all the time, and I would just like to see something more.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, that's 90% of the time.
No,
I'm guilty of it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm guilty of it. I mean,
you create your own porn.
Yeah, I mean, I do.
I don't think so. I mean, every time I see you releasing something, there's usually a lot of meaning behind it, you know?
Other projects that I work on, that it's like other projects that I work on or other things that I film or work on for other people is usually just filming them rock climbing.
Sure.
Which don't get me wrong, I have a lot of fun doing it. But to me, it's like, okay, you know, it's like in the cinematography world, like, you know, you're either going to do a lot of weddings or you're going to do a lot of music videos. But those are like, it's what keeps the revolving door going. And it's like, I just like, you know, and it's like, it's one of the things like I was talking to Carly about the film that she pitched me that I'm going to start working on. Like, I love her film that she pitched me because it is a story about intimacy, about loss, about gain, and about giving homage to someone who is not to a loved one that is no longer here with us today. Like, and then the climbing's involved in it. And it's kind of like, to me, I'm like, okay, that's amazing. I don't know. I'd like to see climbing. I'd just like to see climbing elevate to something a little greater. And that's it, at least for like video content. And I maybe throwing the term around is pretty loose, but that's just, I'm just tired of seeing a lot of the same thing regurgitated, you know, but I'm also very guilty of this on the flip side. Like, I also am very happy to see it when it's other people. Like, seeing Kat climb is amazing. Seeing other Black people climb is amazing. Seeing Kai and Jamrock is amazing, and all these other things. And so like, that's a little different. And like, I definitely accept that. But I don't know. I just think we're at this, I don't know if the precipice is the right word for it, but I feel like we're at this edge where like, we're going to start seeing more complexity of thought and more interesting things start to come out of content creators, much like like you and me. And I'm just really eager to see it because I know we can do more. Like, if we can push these grades and we can push these boundaries in rock climbing, then I'm waiting for, you know, the Daily Show of rock climbing. I'm waiting for, you know, like something different, you know, and I think it can be there. I understand we're still at our infancy in a lot of ways, but, you know, that's it.
Yeah. And what you're getting, I was just like kind of riffing on that term climbing porn because it's like used so widely.
It is.
And then other sports, it's not you like, you don't call something basketball is the only other sport I really care about other than mainstream mainstream sports, and even basketball is way more flawed than climbing is. You know, they're trying to make everyone into like gamblers, you know, these days. But I do think you're getting at the heart of why I continue to do what I do with the climbing zine, is to tell real stories and then give voices to people and to tell their personal narratives. And that's the heart of what it's about and what it's always going to be about. And like everything you're saying, the sentiment I agree with. I just wonder if it's like up to us, you know. I think that climbing is getting more corporate, getting more
Yep.
And I don't think it's necessarily bad, because I think
it needs to happen.
This spark that like we feel about climbing, so many people are able to feel that in a climbing gym now, which is incredible. But
I think you're right. But I think it needs to happen. I think this growth, whether it being corporate, whether it is like climbing, needs to go through growing pains, because like climbing cannot be run by good old boys anymore. Like, it just cannot. Good old boys is, and I do mean that. I don't mean whether you're man, woman, LGBTQ plus, but like this gatekeep, like climbing was very gate kept, and it was run in a very gate kept way, in a long way. And I think we're pretty far past that. I don't think we're over the finish line of that hurdle quite yet, but it can't be run for that way, for the sake of the sport as a whole and the industry as a whole to grow. Like, it has to move beyond that. And Carl, you know, and also to some homage to Carl, because this is something he says a lot. The younger generation coming up is not going to tolerate it. And so like, it's going to grow and it's going to move forward. And I think that's something that I'm really happy to see. It's just, I guess I'm just a little impatient, and I'm just like, I'm waiting for it. But I also know this is like me kicking myself in the butt. I'm working on some other projects that I won't really say here because I'd rather just wait until they're out and then we can talk about them when they're out. But I'm like working on things that like elevate it myself. But I would love to I'd just love to see new concepts and new things in the climbing industry kind of come out, at least in the media side of it.
I totally agree. I totally agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, sorry, I just remembered a side note. I'll edit this part out. Right here. I'll edit this part out later. But I do want to talk to you about doing some writing because I have a couple writing concepts that I'm working on, but they're fictional based stories. So like kind of take like imagine like Ted Lasso, if you've ever watched that, but rock climbing.
Yeah.
So like Ted Lasso, but rock climbing and this and that. But one of the things that I wanted to pitch to you, and I don't know if any of your previous contributors would be interested, but I would love to take a story from maybe one of the climbing teams and then filmed on actual events, but like something slightly dramatized, but it's something we can do fairly low budget. And like turn it into a story. Cause that's one of the big things that I'm working on doing right now. I'm writing 2 scripts. One is kind of a sitcom-y thing. And then one is like a story on grief, but it is something that I definitely want to do. And I feel like I've read enough of yours. There's a few stories that I think would go, but you obviously know all of these far more than I do. But I think like that's a part of like the next step that I think is really important. So, but
yeah, I love that.
Yeah, dude, that's it. My little 20 minutes is expired, so I'm gonna pass the talking stick to you now.
All right, we're doing the most difficult format here, and that is to switch. I did the same thing with Stephen Demmett. So we're doing, you interview me for 20, and then I interview you for 20, and then we kind of free form for whatever is going to be left. But yeah, I did that with Stephen Demmett, and he's
hard.
Dude, he's got like the best podcast voice ever. I love that guy's voice. Like he's just got such a good voice.
Yeah.
But man, I just I guess I'd like to go back to, I want to talk to you about The Climb.
Absolutely.
Which was the show you were on. I guess by now most people know what that is. I want to talk to you about your Malawi project, but I'm just curious about Mario, young Mario, and how young Mario finds climbing. And you mentioned you had a high school teacher that told you to get a fucking job at Walmart. So fuck that teacher.
yeah. He knows who he is.
He knows who he is. But yeah, I just want to hear about young Mario and like what you're like as a young guy and how you get into climbing.
I think so. I didn't really get into climbing until I think I was like 19, just barely turned 20, and didn't get into climbing. But prior to that, my first love was actually track and field. This is how I like big, long, like slightly scary run out routes sometimes. Like my favorite event and my best event was the Open 800, which is just 2 laps around the 2 laps. And it's the most masochistic sport. I think it's the most masochistic event out of all track and field. But I just loved always pushing myself to the limit. I love figuring out where the wall is. And I wanted to figure out if I could just not like poke a hole. I wanted to punch a hole through it and just see if something's on the other side. And if there was another wall a little bit, then I'm going to continue to make the hole so I can fit through it and then keep going. And I've always kind of been that kid. I've always been this kid who speaks his own mind. My parents are always telling me as growing up that I was always kind of like, they would always have to pull me back because I'd always either just start talking to a random adult, and I would start asking questions, and these adults would always be like, how old is your child? It's like old soul. And so I've always been that. As a kid growing up, man, I'll say this, like, I had 2 parents. It was great. They were in the house all the time. I didn't have this. I grew up, my parents bought their house on, we moved into a standard middle-class neighborhood. My parents managed to buy their house on foreclosure because, obviously the people who owned it before couldn't afford it.
And did you grow up in Texas?
No, I grew up in Northern Virginia.
Northern Virginia, okay.
Manassas, Virginia.
Uh-huh.
And so they bought their house, that way. I remember later on, my dad told me, he's like, we just found a house that someone couldn't afford, and we took over the lease, and we were able to do that with the bank, or however all that works. I'm not exactly sure. And then we grew up in this house. We fixed it. We did a little bit of work on it, not much, and that was the house that we had finally grown up in. Prior to that, we lived right down the street in this pretty rough neighborhood, a bunch of townhomes. I remember my parents said, I want to say my older brother had came home and there was like a bunch of gunshots in the neighborhood. And that's when my parents were like, okay, like we got to move. Both of them are former military. Both of my parents are honorably discharged veterans. And I think that was when they moved. Prior to that, it was Quantico. We lived in Quantico base. And then I'm a military brat. So I was born in Germany, been all around the world as a young child and still traveling. My childhood was pretty cool. I mean, I rode bikes, had everything every summer, but I was definitely always the token black kid always around. And it wasn't, honestly, it really wasn't until Bethany Leibowitz and I'm trying to remember his name right now. It'll come to me in a minute. It was so bad not remembering people's names sometime. But they started Color the Crag. And like that was probably one of the only times in my life. Mehall, thank you. Mehall, they started Color the Crag. That was the only time in my life that I was ever really truly around like a bunch of black people. Even the church I went to was a Pentecostal church. It was basically all a bunch of white people, and they were going around and, trying to save all the black and Mexican kids because, they were, I'm not saying they thought we were all heathens, but they definitely thought we were all heathens. And, I kind of grew up in this really kind of cush, really nice, middle class kind of bubble. But I also was very I was very conscious of it. And I was very unintentionally, constantly reminded that I was black a lot. I was, just speaking very candidly here. I remember being in church, and I remember starting to date this girl, and I remember her father walking up to me and saying, like, I really love that you're a man of God. I really love that you're great, but you can never date my daughter. And I was just like, and I remember I asked him why, and he was like, well, we're just too different. And I was trying to get him to say it. And I was like smart enough at the time. And I was like, well, I mean, I was like, the Lord just sees all. And I'm like, kind of like trying to weasel around. And eventually he just like kind of snarled at me, and he's like, it's just never going to happen, and I was just used to that. And then I remember later on, one of my pastors said a comment to me that it was just like, I was always reminded in the youth group that I was, because it was like, if I wasn't being like Wesley Snipes or Eddie Murphy funny, like people would never take me seriously. And when I tried to have like a real cultural conversation with other kids and things like that, they all just looked at me like they never engaged in the conversation. They just looked at me like doe eyes. There's probably, there's only one person growing up that actually really kind of had conversations with me, and her name is Emily. She was like a spiritual mom to me, and her family, and they were the only ones who like really legitimately talked to me about like if I wanted to express issues or talk about it. But I'll never forget my pastor. Remember, I was talking about like how I didn't feel like I fit in and this, and there was things going on in school, like trying to be the leader of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and things like that. And I remember my pastor just looking at me, and he was like, well, Mario, it's hard. It's just, it's going to be hard for you. And for those of us who are like outcasts, that's that. I'm outcast too. And I remember looking at him, and he was like, I'm Jewish. And I'm like, I've known you for 10 years, for like 5 years. No one would ever know that unless you say that out loud. And I remember just looking at him, and like Emily, my spiritual mom, basically like pulled me aside, and she like talked to me and like sizzled me down. But it was like moments like that periodically through my life. And I think, when I got into climbing, I just remember, so I got into climbing because I took a girl on a date, and I just was like wanting for us to like have something to interact, something for us to talk, something to do. I didn't want to sit at a movie, and I didn't want to sit over dinner and just like try to fish for something that I wanted to engage. She hated climbing. I loved it. So I never called her back. I wasn't worried about that. But I remember.
And this is in a gym?
Yeah. This is in a gym. And I remember Stoneworks. It was way back in the day. it was the very first time that people legitimately were asking questions about like my background, where I came from, what do I like. It was the very first time that people were like just just boldly curious about me. And I also get it because I was still the token black guy in the gym, but it was also, there was like the token Asian guy. There was there was the Indian guy. It was like, it was the first time that I saw, like, even though majority of us, there was this, token deck of cards, as I like to call it. Um, it was the first time in my life that people really were like just engaging with me outside of like my best friend Josh growing up with, which he's, Wody. I love him to death. I've known him basically since I was 7, you know, outside of him and a few friends growing up, like it was the first time in my life. And I didn't know it quite yet. I didn't know why I liked the community quite yet until much later on. But then once I kind of found that, and then once I started growing and climbing, and then I started like getting better at climbing, and then people started offering me more advice for me to get better at climbing. And then it was always this like give and take of information. It wasn't telling me what to do. I mean, there was a couple bad actors. Like, I mean, I got called boy a couple times and things like that in the gym, but I expected that from old salty dogs. There was people I expected that from. But even traveling into rural areas, it was the first time that white people started looking out for me in like rural Arkansas and rural Oklahoma and rural here in Wyoming. Like, it was like, even in Colorado, it was the very first time in my life that like, white people actually started looking out for me. And like, outside of Josh, but in a big way, they're like, they pull me aside and like, you got to kind of like tone this down. Like, this is not going to go well for you. And it wasn't, and it was in a place, it was definitely out of a place of love. And I think that's one of the ways why I gravitated towards climbing so much, because, man, it just kind of blew my mind that like, and it's probably fucked up to say, but it blew my mind that like white people would care so much. Because speaking very black here, like, which it sounds really silly to say, but like, I'm trying to think about how to put this in a way that's really easily like in the easy context, like everyone. I don't know one white person that doesn't know another white person who's racist. Almost every white person I've ever met knows someone in their family, not in their family, around them that is racist. And most of those people would not, I'm not saying most of those people. Now, the next question is would that person counteract that culture, counteract that behavior, help that person move past that and see the greater good? And I think, and this is where like Martin Luther King comes in to say, he's like, the racist is not our enemy. It's the moderate. It's the Democratic moderate or the Republican moderate who is our worst. And it's like, I was telling Justin this yesterday. I was like, I would rather a racist over a prejudice any day of the week. At least I know. And so I think the reality was, the climbing community was the first community where I was like, oh shit, I think you would actually say something to that person. Like, I think you would really genuinely be like, this ain't okay, man. Like, we don't do this here. Like, we do not do this here. And it's like, and I think because of that is one of the reasons why I have stayed in this community for so long. Prior to that, nah, like I cannot think of like, I'm not knocking on other sports, but I'm just saying, like, check your own people. But like, I think that the main sports that I have felt that same level of camaraderie in is climbing and I would say climbing and like whitewater, like kayaking or things like that. Those are the only two communities that I've ever met that are just like, they're so freaking similar in that way, where it's like, listen, man, like, if you're not trying to get me killed and you're not trying to get yourself killed and you're just like jumping down, and you're just jumping into the rapids, or you're just tying in and you're going for it, then we're all good. This is not my rock. This is not my river. This is our rocks. This is our river. This is the only two communities that I've ever truly met where like, I can't walk into a room. I don't walk into a space where I'm like, okay, I can tell you from a distance, like, my Negro radar is going off, where I'm like, okay, I need to stay away from you guys in the corner. I can see that from a different, or we, as we like to say, my Negro spider sense kicks in. So yeah, that's kind of like the full thing in a nutshell.
Yeah, and let's put a pin in Color of the Crag, because I want to come back. We'll come back to that in our free form. And I think kind of something of what you said, I want to talk about the climb, and we can naturally transition to this, because I think what you said is kind of reflected in what Cat Runner's challenge was to the climbing community. If I understood it correctly, is like you guys, and maybe even speaking just directly to the white males, almost have to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
And anyways, let's back up to
unpack that.
Yeah, to unpack that, because I think it'll naturally come up when we talk about Cat and him winning the climb and everything. But I haven't watched the climb. Going back to our earlier conversation, and I think once you're creating so much of a thing. You take in. I take in very little climbing media these days. I take in more like, at the end of the day, I want to watch like The Office, or like I or watch Seinfeld or whatever. Like I don't take in a lot of climbing media, and so I haven't seen the climb. But tell me a little bit about your experience with that. And I mean, I think Chris Sharma is like the coolest climber that's ever lived.
Yeah.
Maybe you can confirm or deny that by hanging out with him. But cool, yeah. I guess let's just how did you get involved in that, and talk a little bit about that experience?
A person that still chooses not to be named actually filled out the form for me online. So when they were sending out Instagram ads and things like Climber, someone was like, "You should sign up for this," and then I was like, "Okay." I was like, sure, I'll get around to it. And they know me well enough. I didn't do it. I was just like working on something else, either my podcast or coaching or whatever. But they filled out the blank information with my name, my phone number, and my email. They just put it in there for me. And then I got a call back very quickly. And then, it's pretty a standard process when you're getting interviewed for a TV show. I've actually been interviewed for Survivor, for Lost, and for Naked and Afraid. I just never took those jobs because people don't realize how much you don't get paid a lot, and there's a lot you lose, like, a lot. And when I say lose, I'm not talking just like losing the race or losing the event. It's just like there's a lot of time lost with like friends, family, and like you kind of have to weigh out like the reward or like the experience. Is it really worth like being away from my friends, my family, my job, and my community that much? And those other things, no. But with the climb, it like.
And I guess everyone, I'm sure most people know what it is, but it's essentially a climbing reality TV show, right?
So the Climb is a reality climbing TV show, and it was essentially hosted by Chris Sharma and Jason Momoa. The premise of the show was to take what they believe is the top amateur climbers in the world and allow them to become the greatest amateur climber ever, with a grand prize of $100,000. Kat was the winner of it, came through and just slammed. And during that film process, it was actually a little wild. So without any breaches of contract here, the best way I can describe that experience was it was like finding my climbing community for the first time in the early 2000s. Like, we all knew of each other, like when we met. And that was like the best part about it. Like, all of us almost followed all of us in social media. And when we all walked into the room, I'll never forget. And my story getting there is actually kind of wild. I was the last one to show up. And I don't know if I was the last one to be picked, but little sidebar. So I haven't actually said this story actually out in this caliber before. So when I flew out of Dallas, they flew me. There was a big storm happening. And I was supposed to fly from Dallas. I think I was supposed to go from Dallas, Miami to Spain, Miami to Mallorca, Miami to Madrid to Mallorca. But there's a huge storm, and my flight got diverted to London. And then while I was waiting for production to get my flight in order, I ended up booking my own flight, chartering my own bus to another plane in London. So I went from like London proper all the way down to like Gatwick or somewhere else. Jumped on another flight, got there, and then when I was in Barcelona, no, I was in Madrid. And And then while I was in Madrid, I was waiting to get on a plane. I got on a plane. The Madrid airport, the Mallorca airport got shut down. And you can look this up in the papers for when this has for a timestamp. The Mallorca airport got shut down because apparently a bunch of people, I don't know if they were illegal immigrants or migrants or however it worked, but they faked a heart attack down the plane in Mallorca. And when the plane landed and the person pretended to stop having a heart, when the plane landed, they kicked open the emergency doors and like 10 people scattered on the island at large.
Jeez.
And I'm sitting on a plane and they won't open the airport until all the cops catch them. So I'm literally on the phone, don't know very much, a lick of Spanish, trying to translate with Google and charter a boat to get to the show on time so I don't lose my spot. And so it was just like a wild event getting there. The climb in general was a beautiful experience because like I said, all of us knew each other. All of us kind of like we were following each other. But when we finally got together, it was interesting. Like Hollywood had no idea what climbing was. Like they've seen it, obviously, like, you know, Free Solo and all that other stuff. They had seen it, but they didn't understand the climbing community. I think one of the biggest things with the climb, which was the greatest thing is they put some amazing people together, and they put people who love the sport desperately and want to protect the sport with a vigor. I think what they weren't expecting was people to want to protect the sport so much that a lot of us didn't really care about winning $100,000. Most of us were like, you can keep the $100,000. I'm not willing to act like, you know, Love Island, and be trashy and crazy and put a bad name on this sport. And, you know, and
Well, so you think that because I haven't watched it, and I'm sure some people that have
it's not
watched
portrayed.
it.
You don't see that.
Yeah.
I'm skirting. I'll say this. I'm skirting with the law right here.
Sure.
Saying this, but the most I can say is like the way production was hoping things were going and the way the film turned out is two different things. But it did turn out beautifully, and it turned out really well. And I think Chris was a very big advocate of like, this is not how climbers are. Like, I get this is, and he was very much like, I get this is what you guys want. I get this is like, you really want to see like some drama. You really want to see them like, oh, I hope this person falls. I hope this person doesn't sin. And he's like, but like, we told them that, and Chris sat down and told them like, that's not how this works. Like, the climbing community is not that way.
And Chris is not that way.
No.
Like Chris is, I mean, I think Chris is the Michael Jordan of rock climbing. Who never will ever get his props because he was just in the wrong moment. You know, I think if Chris was now, you know, if he was like the Olympic gold and the V16,
you don't think
whatever,
he got his props growing up? Man, the dude was on Rolling Stone magazine.
I don't think he's as iconic as he should be because of the era he came up in.
Oh, I mean, I can see that. I think people, when they know him,
but maybe because he's from our generation. He's my GOAT. He's my like Michael Jordan of rock climbing.
So, and I think I get that. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why we were saying earlier, like climbing media has elevated so much production value. This, like, if Best of the West was to come out right now, that would be wildfire. But like, and for those of you who do not know, like my opinion, Best of the West is one of the greatest climbing films ever made. If you just want to watch like pure rock climbing and just people just smash rock climbs and just go out of it, Chris Sharma in Best of the West was like the best film ever. I mean, yeah, Rampage was great. Yeah, The Island was great. Yeah, like a bunch of that. I mean, I think the only other film that I think is really that great is probably The Odyssey, which is a European film, which shows like the leading ladies of trad climbing and sport climbing. With like, but I can go down a rabbit hole of like dissecting climbing movies and especially early climbing films, because I'm probably one of the few people who still have a bunch of old climbing films on VHS. Like I have the old Pusher tape, you know, and I watch that thing occasionally, and it's just, I'm just like, this is when it was good. This was like early 90s skateboarder, like we're like rebelling, but this is a story, but like how we're just doing this. It was just different, you know, and it was a different age.
Yeah, I just feel like Chris Sharma could be the face of climbing, but I think right now the face of climbing is like Tommy Caldwell and Alex Honnold still.
I would say the face of climbing is Adam Ondra and Alex Honnold. I don't
think Ondra's that big. Like, as big as I don't think
not
you know to the greater world. Like
I think everybody knows his name.
Non-climbers.
Oh, okay. If we're going outside of climbing,
yeah, we're going to let's pin this for later too, because let's get back to the climb.
Yeah,
let's get back to the climb.
Back to the climb. But yeah, and so the climb was
and we don't have to stick to these arbitrary time limits, but yeah, let's stay on topic.
We well past that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the climb was. I think that was like the beauty of the climb, and it's like we really had an opportunity to showcase the sport for what it was, and cinematically it was done beautifully. And Chris did a really good job of arbitrating to make sure the sport was held in a way. And I also think they really did a really good job of making it palatable to the masses and also simplifying it, talking about different things. I mean, do I like what he said about me? No. But was it true? Yes.
What did he say about you?
Oh, I mean, no, I want to give a little caveat. Many people don't know this, but I had actually, for the first time, I threw out my back 3 months before I like left for the climb. And there's a lot of other stuff that's going on, which is a little too personal for this podcast. But those of you who know me know what I was going through during that time. But, Chris was like, when I basically got put on the chopping block for the first time, and it was me and Maiza on the chopping block. The second time, I was like the comeback kid. Because I got put on the chopping block in the beginning, then I got put on the chopping block in the second place we went to, and then I got put on the chopping block in the third place. But I just did not have the fitness. Like I had the drive, I had the motivations, I had the skill set, but I just did not have the fitness just to keep up with everybody else. And that was just point blank. And it hurt my feelings when he said it, but at the same time, he wasn't wrong. And I think that's also kind of another thing too. Like, I don't think he meant it in a bad way. I think he meant it like, if you really want to climb these grades and you really want to do these things, he's like, this is the thing you need to work on. And that's the thing that he said. And, and Megan definitely agreed with him. They were like, that's like the only thing that's holding you back, and I think that was coming from a place of like, hey, we are running a TV show. We've got to be straightforward. We got to let you know going on, but then also coming out of a place of love as coaches, as people who want to see climbers get better. Like, this is what you really need to do. And it was, I mean, I wouldn't change that experience for anything. Brad, Tiffany, Maiza, April is a hoot. April is an absolute hoot. Deco, Dom, Kat, Robin, all of us, like, we all still talk to this day on a regular basis. Actually, we were all talking today, literally on WhatsApp, just like seeing how everybody's doing. And
how many other reality TV shows did that ever happen with?
I don't know.
I don't engage in any reality TV at all. I mean, obviously I know what it is, but it seems like they do try to. That's an important point about climbing is that it like brought you guys together, this experience, when in another context it could have made you onto mortal enemies, right?
Yeah, and I think they were. I think to a certain extent they were hoping for a little bit of mortal enemies. But I don't think what they were expecting for us is for us to be like, climbing means more to us than being on this TV show. And I think sometimes the production was like, then why did you come? And we were like, because you gave us an opportunity to climb around the world. Like, why wouldn't we go?
That's so refreshing to hear that take on it,
Yeah, like it's a little known fact, but like those who know, members of the cast, we've all said this in private, and I'm the only one saying this in public, but we cared more about the sanctity of climbing than we did care about that. I mean, I think that's also why Reddit just like ripped the thing apart too. It's like climbers were like, oh, why aren't they like climbing harder, or why aren't they like, like there's not more drama or like this. I would just be like, screw all y'all and this and that. And it's like, well, this is why you didn't need to be there.
Like, and Chris's values was probably reflected in the people that he chose. Yeah,
it's very much so. Like,
I don't know too many people on it, but I met Brad Burns. Seems like a really nice guy, really active guy. Dude. And then just knowing Kat through Kat's presentation, Kat's values he seems like an incredible stand-up human.
We all got to hang out for like a week or two because the weather was bad. So we were like shooting in between, like building origin stories around everybody. But like, we all had a moment where we all sat down at dinner one night and we all talked about it. Like, all of us together at one big table, we were all just like, what's the most important thing to us? And everybody unifiably said on their own, no coercion, no nothing. Like, we just want to see climbing represented well to the rest of the world. Like, this is our one shot for it to be represented well and not turn into, you know, the flavor of love, or whatever other things are out there. And I think,
Is that another reality TV show?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm just using love reality TV shows because they're so trashy.
Oh man, I can't say I've ever even watched one.
I
My
don't.
parents maybe got into one of those, and I proliferally watched maybe The Bachelor or whatever. But,
Oh yeah, I can't do
yeah,
it.
no,
I
I
just can't do
cringy.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, man, I think that was like the thing with the climb that was the most beautiful thing about it. Like, we cared about climbing and we wanted everybody to be proud of climbing. We didn't really care whether you were proud of us or not, but we cared about is like, do you still love the sport? Because what we didn't want is someone to be like, oh, I didn't get into climbing because I saw the way you guys were acting. Like, that was something none of us could live with. And, the coolest thing that I think for me was, shortly after the show aired, I had a bunch of people walk up to the gym like, I saw you and I saw you there in Dallas. So I just decided to get into rock climbing because I saw you. And I'm like, it makes my heart swell, And I think that's it. I mean, I think they did a good job. I think the show was beautifully done, masterfully done. Sidebar, I would like to reshoot the climb. I have my own way that I think I would like to do it. That would cause good drama. Still keep it spicy, but still still honor the sport in my own way. But that's for another day.
That's for a future Mario project. Yeah.
That's not this project. But if anybody listening wants to fund it, then we'll do it now. But yeah, so yeah, that's kind of man, it was the best experience of my life. Like, I would say, like, you have your climbing crews that you meet throughout life, and your first crew is usually the most memorable one. And I think it's very rare that you get to get a second crew. That's really that memorable. Most of the time, your first crew is your most memorable one, and then you meet individuals along the way. But the ability to have a second crew that I would climb with anytime, any day, that like cares for me as much as my first crew, Kenzie Davis, Jared Staines, oh man, I can't, Brian Anthony's, VJ. I'm thinking of all these people in the past, Taylor Sostre, Devana, all these people. And if I forgot your name, Dennis, Trent, whose house we're in right now.
Who I've never met. Shout out to Trent. I don't think I've met Trent. Maybe I have.
You'll meet him soon enough. He's up in Wild Iris,
Nice.
working a proj. But like all these people, like, I've like a lot of those people I met sprinkles along the way. But the first couple names, like, they were the people that I was climbing with in the very beginning of my climbing. And to really just meet a family and a group of people that I love so much, to the point where, like, they say they say your heart is made up of like a bunch of different cells, but your heart has little brain cells in it. That's what keeps it beating on its own. That's why, like, you can be brain dead, but your heart keeps beating. But, one of the things those cells, emotions, as much as people like to say they're in their head and in their heart, your brain cells are what holds emotions. And that's why, like, if you're heartbroken, if you're really grieving in pain, or really in a lot of joy, sometimes you feel it in your chest. Your heart remembers these things. And every time I think about them, like, I feel like my heart's just like lifting out of my chest. I love these people with all my heart and soul. And they know that, like if they call without a moment's notice, I'm like, I could be in the middle of anything. It's just like, yeah, you're all gonna have to wait for a hot second. Actually, I've been on a podcast and one of them has called me and I'm like, we need to stop. And like, it's very few people that I pick up the phone for. It's like family, romantic partner, and them. And that's basically it.
Yeah, and during Kat's presentation at the Climbers Festival, we're recording this shortly after the Climbing Festival. He just gave you a shout out and he was like, "Climb family,"
Yes.
And I love that. I've heard the members, the cast of The Office, say the same thing, like Office family. I'm just like referencing The Office. But I was very moved by Kat's presentation at the Climbing Festival. Kat's a trans male climber who very much embraces that identity, and also, was very vocal in this presentation about the things that he's experienced, whether it's being in a rural Miami, or not rural Miami, but rural Wyoming, and someone making a statement to him, threatening him just for existing in the world. what I'm assuming seeing that presentation, you already knew Cat, so you knew that was coming. But I think that hopefully that kind of rocked the audience um, into the realities of, people that are different, that the challenges they face in the climbing community. Yeah, can you just talk a little bit about your friendship with Cat and your thoughts on the presentation?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Kat's presentation was awesome. I really think he did a really good way of. I think he did a good job of setup. Like, I think he did a really good job of setup. How to say this? He did a good job of setup, palatable, give you the chance to swallow. Setup, palatable, give you the chance to swallow. And I think that's like something that he really, really, really worked really hard on to make it that way. Kat and I were actually bunkmates twice. I think twice during the climb. Definitely.
And Cat was the winner of the climb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Kat in Syriana, we shared a cabin together, and so him and I got a lot of time to talk and a lot of time to spend time together, and it was, knowing Kat and spinning that presentation, I was expecting something of that caliber. I was really expecting a CTA, a call to action, and to kind of like to piggyback on what he's saying and to kind of like add my own experiences or my own thoughts to what he said, it really is up to the duty of the climbing community to protect everybody else that's in it. And when we say everybody else, we're going to say the majority of you, and you know who you are. Whether you want to say that you're white male or white woman, but like however you identify, but if you were white passing, regardless of gender or or the gender that you assign yourself to, like you are passing more in these places, rural Wyoming, rural Arkansas, rural everywhere, because that's where climbing really is. I think he did a beautiful job of like really kind of laying it down in perspective of like what we as people who are the other go through. It's like prime example here while I was here. I mean, the first day that I was in town, not a big deal, but one of the bartenders told me he had to stop a lady because she thought I was stealing my own hat out of the bar. In the Lander bar, there's a bunch of spurs and things on the wall. And in Texas, we have hat hooks everywhere for cowboy hats. So, Lander catch up. But I like put my hat on one of the spurs that are on the wall. And then right as I'm leaving, I just grab my hat. And apparently the bartender was like, that man's stealing a hat and then things like that. And the bartender was like, no, he walked in with that. Like, that's his thing. And he's like, plus, if we had hats on the wall, you probably would have known, but they haven't been here. And so like these little things happen and they're small. Well, sorry. They are not small to us. They're huge to us, but they're small little incidences
That you're used to.
that we're used to. I mean, like we expect it. It was like prime example, like a friend of mine sent me a message. He was like, I've never seen so many. He's like, your Instagram was like really heartfelt. I've never seen so many black people and black and brown people all at ICF all at once. And then he immediately sent me the next thing. He was like, I'm assuming y'all were keeping your head up. And I was like, and I responded, I was like, you damn right. And it's kind of one of those things. It's like, it's like, and for those of you who don't know the phrase, it's the same thing of like what woke is. Woke, before woke became woke, woke actually meant stay awake and keep your eyes out for the cops or people who don't like you. But
And that's something that we as white males don't have to think
not,
about.
It's not in your sphere.
Yeah.
You just don't, you get to kind of walk around in life and just like, unless you're actively worrying about it, unless you have a partner that is not white, you don't think about it. And if you do think about it, it's because you have black or brown or LGBTQ, you have other friends. Let's just simplify it like anyone, the other. It's because you have other friends. And if you don't think about it, you don't know you don't have black friends. You don't have LGBTQ plus friends. You just know people. And so it's just this weird thing, man. Like people just don't really, maybe, I don't know if this is going to make sense to say this, but like we are designed to we should be able to walk around in our environments and feel comfortable and just exist. And the fact of the matter that privilege has really been designed for a particular people group for a long time. And yes, have we moved a long way from certain things? Yes. Are we really that far away from certain things? No, because we still have to have these conversations, because people will come up and say threatening things to Kat, because people will come up and say, accuse me of stealing things, because, you know, it's just, it's just this world that we live in. So, but getting back to the call of action, um, I think like the biggest thing that like Kat said, it's like, it is just your guys' job to be diligent and kind of keep your eyes open. And honestly, it really doesn't take that much. It really doesn't. Like, everyone knows when, like, energy and a vibe is a thing. We all know that, especially in the climbing crowd. And we all know when someone rolls up to the crag and the vibe is off. And we all know when it's just kind of like weird. It's the same thing if, like, if there's a creepy individual, creepy dude creeping around women, or if there's a creepy woman creeping around men, or like just kind of like, you know, like we all know these things. And we're not asking you to like just handcuff somebody to the, you know, to the crag and don't let them rock climb. What we are asking you is just be like, don't be afraid to be like, hey, like, that's not what we do here. Like, we don't do that here. Like I understand if that's what you want to do, but like for the most part, like don't do that. And the reality is what most people have to understand is we walk into almost every environment, especially in places like this, but 90% of the time we walk into the environment under the assumption that you are not going to do that. Like, that is the assumption. So we're preparing for that from the get-go. Like, you know, how long does it take me to do this? How long does it take me to get out of town? How long does it do this? Like, we always walk in with this assumption that it's not going to happen. Because it is more devastating to walk into a situation assuming that it's going to happen, and when it doesn't happen. And it's kind of fucked up to say, but I'd rather be proven wrong that it's not going to happen than have my heart broken knowing that and assuming that it was going to happen. And I mean, it's just kind of the reality of life, you know, for anyone who is the other. So, you know, to kind of add on to Kat's CTA, all I'm going to ask you to do is just don't be afraid to be diligent. Don't be afraid to like say something. Like, it goes a long way. I'm not asking you to like, you know, read, you know, white fragility and, you know, this is how it is to be black and all this other stuff. I'm not asking you to do that. All I'm asking you to do is just be as diligent as you would of your own brother or sister, assuming that you have a great family relationship, but be as diligent as you would as your own family member. Be as diligent as you would as an innocent little child. Be as diligent as you would just for anybody. And once again, like, we're not asking you to like put on binoculars and just start scanning the crowd for the racist or for the sexist or for the person who, you know, has hidden intentions or wants to be creepy. I'm not asking that. All I'm asking you to do is just like stay woke, you know? I mean, that's honestly, at the end of the day, that's really it. There's a reason why we've kept that word. There's a reason why that word was used in our community for so long. Now going back because woke is just, you know, bastardized and, you know, stolen by Karens, or, you know, every Boulder mom that has a disabled dog, no offense, but, you know, now it's just like, you know, just keep your head up, keep your ears open. You know, that's kind of honestly the end of that. I think anything else is just beating a dead horse.
Well, that warms my heart to know the climb experience was like that, because like I said, I don't know much about it and I haven't really talked to anyone who's been involved. So it really warms my heart that y'all are a crew, and that's super cool. And I'm sure that Chris Sharma's DNA being in that, and then what climbing is as well, is probably a big part of that.
It was.
Yeah.
It definitely was. Yeah, Chris was cool. Like, I mean, he definitely had a job to do. Don't get me wrong. Like, when he was there, he was in a job. I mean, he's also a dad, so he was like, he lives there, so it was easy. But it was definitely a great experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. And if I had to do it all over again, I definitely would, especially with the same crew. But yeah, I think it was definitely by far one of the best things to happen for climbing in general. And I think, you know, it was a nice way to kind of like help open climbing up to the next level. And also being on the climb is really what made me realize like it's possible to elevate climbing media to another platform, not to another platform, but elevate climbing media, and there's room for climbing media to be diversified. There's room for climbing media to have different avenues, and just by that experience alone, because I was like, man, if someone from Hollywood can do this, we within ourselves, within our own community, we can probably tell some amazing stories and really kind of create content that resonates on a much larger scale across the board, not just within our niche. And I think we can do that. And so I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see where all this is going. Getting into Climb Malawi.
Yeah, so give us a little synopsis on, this is a feature film or a film that you're working on that was also a project from the Global Climbing Initiative. Yep.
So Climb Malawi, I think it would probably be best to start with I got brought on to Climb Malawi because Genevieve actually recommended me. Climb Malawi was originally
Genevieve Walker. Okay.
Genevieve Walker, so recommended me for Climb Malawi because GCI was already working with her. The Global Climbing Initiative was already working with her to take her to there to mentor them, and they wanted someone to mentor in bolting and route development, but they really wanted people of color going to Africa to teach people of color, and it was something very important to them. And I just, I know there's not a lot of black people in rock climbing, but I just assume there's a ton of black people probably already bolting and doing that, and I didn't realize I was one of the few, and out of all the black people, out of black men bolting, I'm probably the most prolific all the time. And so I didn't know that. And so they invited me to go along on this trip. And our whole mission was to mentor them in the skills and in the disciplines that they needed to help them further the growth of their climbing community, because they're already in the movement. For the last 5 years, it's already been a slow rumble and a slow growth. And what we were really going there to do is shore up all of those skills. The film actually kind of came.
Can you tell me exactly where Malawi is, too?
Yeah, absolutely. Malawi is basically dead center. If you just go a little south of dead center and a little bit over to the eastern side of Malawi, you'll see some big bodies of water, some lakes. Malawi is a little teeny country, and they call it the warm heart of Africa there. And 1/3 of the country is a lake. Actually, most people don't realize that. And I believe 1/5 of the world's biodiversity in fresh water lives in that lake. So it's very big and it's very cool. And so Malawi is roughly in between, I think it's like Zimbabwe or Zambia. I don't remember which one. Kenya's a little bit above it. But it's basically within that region of the world. Actually, I didn't realize this. I just learned a little fun fact. Malawi is also where, what's his name? Tolkien, who filmed Lord of the Rings, is where he got a lot of his ideas and inspirations on how to create that, because he toured the country before making that film. A little fun tidbit. But yeah, we got asked to go out there and mentor, and the film kind of happened by accident. So originally, this other group of people were supposed to go. I believe this husband and wife couple, or two people, were supposed to do it. And there was a climbing company that was originally funding the film. That climbing company pulled out, and they bailed. To not to be named, but they pulled out, and I didn't actually find out they pulled out until about I want to say 12 to 10 days before we left. And I was just pissed about it. And I just remember being like, okay, in the meetings, we'll just take a bunch of pictures with our phones, and then we'll do some videos, and we'll just kind of whip something together. And I was like, that's BS. Like this is and then it honestly pissed me and Genevieve off so bad that when we were pitching the idea to brands, and granted, I want to be clear, we were pitching a little bit late because we found out late. But it just infuriated me that brands talk about diversity and inclusion and opportunities and all these things. And even brands that I work with, except for organic, they were the only one, organic climbing, OGs, Josh for life. If you're listening to this and you don't own anything from organic, I'm telling you to go buy it. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, because he's a real one. Um, outside of him, no one was really willing to pitch money to the film. And we were like, you talk about diversity, you talk about inclusion, yet you'll pay for someone to go fly fishing down in you know, Southern Americas in Brazil or wherever else. And then they're like, oh, we're going to give back to the community there. We're going to hire like all these fishing guides and we're going to pay them double with their wages. And then that's like really giving back. And I'm like, that's jack shit. That's not building infrastructure. That's just doubling someone's salary. Like, don't get me wrong, really great that you did it. But like, how does that help or make things better? And we are like, we're literally going to a country to help mentor a community that is in the process of trying to build climbing ecotourism in a country that has a ton of rock all over it. And we're trying to help them beat expats and Europeans to the punch so it doesn't end up like Patagonia, where you go, a bunch of Americans, ex-Americans, and ex-Europeans live there, and they pay the locals pennies on the dollar, scraps to either work as guides, Sherpas, or whatever else they do. And I don't care if, $25 a day is a really great, amazing living wage in that country. If I, as an American, and if I'm an IFMGA guide and I show up there, I expect to get $1,500 a day, and I will get that because of that. And there could be a guide there with just as much experience, just as much knowledge, but because this country doesn't have this, governing body of the AMGA and I think what we're represented by France or Canada or wherever, but regardless, because they don't have that, you're going to be like, well, we're still going to pay them the best wage they can get. It's bullshit. And so and we were going to Africa to ensure that they can create it and they're the ones, and no one wanted to bite. And we were just like floored that no brands wanted to bite. So I was just super pissed off about it. And I was just like, I'm talking to my family. My parents are nervous. There's a lot of unrest in the very northern parts of Africa and some countries over there. My parents were really super nervous, but my dad and my mom could tell I was like, something was bothering you. Your parents know you. And I kind of expressed to them, and I'll never forget. My mom was just like, okay, if you were going to film this, how much would it cost? I'm like, I don't know. Like their budget was 30,000. I think I can do it on 20. Now my mom was like, no, bootstraps, like just showing up and getting it done. And I was like, oh, I don't know, Mom, like 9-10 grand, maybe $8,000. My parents wrote me a check for a little over $8,500, almost $9,000. And so I just bought a camera, bought some other stuff that I needed. I already own a bunch of production equipment from running a podcast all the time. So I had a good idea of what to do. And I've done some video work before. I've done more editing, more podcast editing. I've done more sound work, and I've done a little bit of camera work. But I talked to Scott and I talked to Genevieve, and I was like, you guys want to try and do this when we're doing there? And I got to give GCI a big shout out. They tolerated me going cowboy and just showing up and doing whatever I want. I never told them I was going to do this. They never approved of it. They never gave me permission to deviate from what I wanted, from what I was supposed to go do. And I just went full cowboy and just did what I wanted, which
Sponsored by your parents.
Yeah.
I love that.
yeah. I mean, and that's it. And then Organic really paid for the rest of the post-production and really brought the rest of the film to it. So that's why I am a fan of Josh and Organic for the rest of my life, because they have basically launched me into this career that I am in now.
And yeah, tell me about the people of Malawi that you met and interacting with them. And...
Yeah. So everybody down there is just, well, I think the first thing is like, before I jump straight into that, I want to say this is like, everybody, when Genevieve and I walked down there, Genevieve and I were just so starstruck, and I'd like to get this out of the way so I can talk about them, but we were so starstruck to be in a country that looks like us. You have to understand, like, most Black people, the only time we see a fraction, and I'm talking like a minute, like 2,000, like 1 of 2,000ths of a fraction of that many Black people altogether is in church, a Million Man March, or maybe like, one of these events like Color the Crag or that. And even then, you're only seeing like 50 to 60 or 100 of the same people that we all know. To be in an entire country that looks like you.
This is your first time in Africa.
Yes.
Yeah.
We just kind of had to sit down for a second. We were like, what is going on? And I told a friend about this, and like very few people pick up on this, but like I told my buddy, I'll never forget, we walked into like a CVS kind of a place, and I instinctually walked to the back corner and to the right. And Genevieve was like, where are you going? And I'm like, oh, gotta go to the black people section. And she was like, the whole store is black people section. Like it's right in the front. And it just blew my mind. I was like, I am so programmed to know that like this is where I belong and this is where my stuff is. And I need to only go over here, you know? And so I want to really give a lot of reference to that, because when we started finally meeting Shalom, Clive, Moses, Ed, Aka, Emmanuel, everyone there, they're so warm and they're so inviting. They started messaging us long before we even came. Once they knew that we were coming, how to describe family that you didn't know that you have is very hard. But I guess the best way I know to describe it is Malawians are by far the most patient, gentle, and they have such a cadence about them that it almost has a lot of reverence, especially the climbing community, you know? And it was something that like we felt like we just knew them their whole lives. I was talking to I think we were talking to Shalom. We were talking to Shalom and Moses and just hearing different things about their lives. And there's just like they're a whole world away, which seems like it, you know, but there's so many intersectionalities of our lives. And to understand that like they, you know, you just think someone in another country just has this completely different life experience than you. And knowing that like they kind of are going through the same thing, you know, the difference between us, the biggest difference between us and them is, you know, we were impressed in a country. African Americans are impressed in a country that their ancestors are not from, and so we were brought to a place, and then we were brought to a place and never welcomed in this place. They are oppressed in their own land, and it's like it's a different thing. It's like, you know, look at this. I forget what YouTuber said this, but it was something that really stuck with me. He was like, you will never understand what it's like to deal with colonizers and be oppressed in a country where you can trace your lineages back to the tree, back to the village, back to, you can trace your lineage like however far back you want to go to the very village of where it is, the town, the community of where it started, and be impressed in your own land the entire time, as they will never understand what it's like to be in a country and know that you are oppressed here, but you have no roots, you have no stake. And any time that you do have stake or anything, it gets too far. Granted, we're thank God we're past this point. Hopefully we stay past this point. All fingers crossed in 2025. But you know, because, and what I'm referencing is like the Tulsa massacre or the lakes of I think the lakes of Missouri, or, you know, Rosewood, Florida. You know, all these places were well-to-do black communities or that, and they either burned to the ground or they told people to leave, and they built a dam and flooded the entire villages, like they flooded the entire towns. You know, and it's like, and so you're constantly used to being displaced. And knowing that there's some kind of intersectionalities there when we start talking. And I want to be very clear, we're not showing up and just talking about like woe is me and all the bad things that have happened. There's just a cadence to you when you have certain life experiences that are the same, or at least bring the same heightened sense of awareness to you. There's just these weird cadences that are just like the puzzle pieces fit. Even though they're from a different puzzle, the puzzle pieces fit. That's probably the best way to say that. And when we were talking, he's just this real big bond, and knowing that they want to be able to see climbing grow in a way where they can create an economy from it and they can create a living from it. The moment that this event happened, like I told GCI very quickly, once I got on board and once I kind of understood what's going on, I told them I would only commit to this if it was a multi-year project. And they were very clear, like, this is a 1-year project. If you want to make it a multi-year project, it's on you. Like, you're the one running the bus on this. And so, and Veronica, Tyler, and GCI have definitely been very much with me running the bus. And I definitely will admit, I also got to give them a big thanks for tolerating me, because I pushed very hard to make sure we're still going back, to make sure we're still sending resources. And that's one of the reasons why the film that's why, like, even more so why the film got made. And so when I came back, spent about a year making the film, learning how to make my first documentary. This is my very first one. And I got to thank all the partners that were involved. Dylan, who did a lot of editing, Jennifer, who did a lot of the motion graphics and a lot of things like that. And then, Christian, who really helped us with like story building and kind of understanding sequence and like understanding like how ebb and flow of these things. Like, there's a lot of partners that went into this thing. I know my name is director and producer, but I need to let everyone to know that, like, I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of people. And I really, my natural instincts is to get off of the shoulders and let them be in the front of the room. But they have been very insistent that I need to be standing. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but I also understand like what this is doing. And so Malawi is beautiful. So and so I'm going back in 12 or 13 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Malawi, originally after editing it, we realized that this is not a one-off. This is a docu-series. So Climb Malawi is the first film.
Is that already out?
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Okay, great.
Well,
great.
okay, correction. It is
It's
out.
made.
It's made.
Yeah.
It will be available on Vimeo for streaming and downloading real soon.
Cool.
Probably within the next 60 days or so. We have submitted it to a ton of different film festivals, and some film festivals require you not to make it public consumption before they do that. And so we're hoping that it just works in a bunch of film festivals. So we submitted it to like 15, 16 different places. And so we're hoping that it gets picked up. But after all those submissions get processed, then people are going to be able to download it. And then when I'm going this time, we're working on mentorship and like site surveying, reconnaissance, and really kind of like looking for rocks and how to catalog it and how to get it all into just kind of like get a database going on. So like as they're developing routes, they have a system. It's not just like this little route that gets here. We also know when bolts got put in. We also know what bolts got put in. We know if they were 5/8, 3/16, were they stainless steel, were they, zinc, just so we know, so we can start tracking it. And we don't have the same problem that we have here in the United States before it. Because I think the country has like maybe, you can look online, but I think it's like maybe a total of like 200 routes total, and with the potential of like, probably a couple million when you look at the whole country. And so that's happening. And then I'm also mentoring a gentleman named Maurice. And we are shooting basically the second film in the series. And essentially the film is about the first Malawian to ever climb. His name is Site. And he climbed 30 years ago with a man from New Mexico his last name is Hubert. I can't remember his first name right now, but I don't know the backstory, but we're filming that story of him talking about his first experience in climbing, because you have to understand, like, climbing has been established in Malawi for 40 years. The first Malawian climbed 30 years ago. And then all of a sudden there's been like a 24 to 25 year gap where none of them climbed. But yet there was all of us foreigners kept on going over there and just doing it. And so we are filming his story, kind of like a historical doc, kind of a historical thing. And then we are also tying in how learning about Site's climb, how does that motivate, inspire, and also kind of like what's going on with the current youth that we did mentor and help. And that's like the next film. And then the last film is actually going to be shot in 2025. And that's a 3-part series, because the first film, it just doesn't do it justice. And the more and more we thought about it, like, this is a 3-part series. So we're hoping the first film that you can watch is kind of like how it's starting. The second film is going to be like, the first film is how it started. The second film's like, how's it going and what's the inspiration? the third film is going to be like, okay, this is where the journey is going. We want you to join. And so that's kind of like the big project. And I feel very blessed and very privileged and very lucky to know that like my first major films are going to be a series, and I have people in my corner and supporting me and helping me out and do this. So it's a big deal.
Oh, I love that. I'm looking forward to seeing the film, and
Yeah.
it sounds like we'll probably release this building up to when you can first start to stream it.
Yeah.
And yeah, wish you the best of luck, and looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I think Malawi is going to be the best thing to hit the market in the next like 10 years. I think like, man, like Chambe, like no, yeah, the east face of Chambe, like that mountain is so big. Like that thing sits at I believe it's 1,600 meters at its height. Like El Cap is what, 958, 917 meters tall.
Uh-huh.
Like, yeah, think about it. Like it's one is 1,600 meters tall and the other one is this. It's massive.
Yeah.
And that's like one mountain range in the southern region. Then you have all these giant outcroppings all over the country. And it's like Ethan Prinkle actually went there I think it was him. He went there a couple years ago, and he was doing bouldering in Monkey Bay, and he was just blown away about like the quality of the rock and how much is there. So I'm really excited. I think if there's anything I do in my life, if I can be responsible for, I mean, I would love this to be in America, but you know, I was lucky enough to own one of the first black guiding companies for a long time before COVID put a double tap in that thing. But if I can at least be responsible, if I can at least be a small nudge or a small propeller, a little blade on the prop that helps move this community forward to where they are the ones running and writing their own future, then I am very, 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 very content with my climbing life. And I'm very, very content. Like for a long time, I always thought like climbing 515 or climbing 514 was the best thing you could ever do for your rock climbing. The best thing you can ever do is just be on belay and give someone else a catch or help someone else succeed. And I think that matters way more than what you climb. Like great, you climb 513, 514, that's cool for you. But like really like how are you protecting this sport that we love, and how are you helping it move forward? And most importantly, like how are you helping the least of us in this thing? And I think that's like what we were talking about with like climbing media before. Like I just want to see more of that. Like I just want to see more. I just want to see more things that are like moving all of us forward in a direction that I think is like really important. All right, I feel like I'm rambling, so.
No. You sort of like that was going to be my last question in my head, because I spent a lot of time in Mexico climbing, and that's very much shifted my perspective on climbing in general. What did you bring back from Malawi?
Outside of amazing pottery, I'm like a big art collection. I want to be a big art collector in my life. And I love, like, they have some of the most exquisite pottery I've ever seen. I spent a lot of money getting some stuff shipped back. But, man, yeah, I think I summed it up. I think I've said this for a long time, and I think I really agree with this more. But I think the biggest thing that I brought back is, like, rock climbing honestly does not matter. It is the people in the sport that matter. Like, like, like realistically, what we do is stupid. You know, it's like we're like from a safety and a sanity standpoint, like what we're doing is dumb. But if you can help someone else feel invigorated and feel free and be able to have power over their life, and I think one of the biggest things that really I took away from Malawi, and I'll definitely share the film so you can watch it. It's how they view climbing. Not once, and I don't want to give this away too much, but I don't think I'm going to give it this. This is not a spoiler for the film, but really not once in the entire interview process with like interviewing them that they really not once did one person say, I want to climb stronger. I want to be this. I want to do that. They said, rock climbing lets me build a family. It lets me build community. It lets me meet people from around the world. I have brothers, I have sisters that I didn't know. It allows me to have relationships. It allows me to just have friendships. It allows me a place to be the best version of me, because you have to understand Malawi, like that culture, it's very tribal. It's very like hierarchical. Like you don't, like if you're a doctor, you do not associate with a gardener. If you are a city official, you do not associate with a restaurant owner. Like you don't do that. Like that's not a thing. Like if you're an elder, you do not speak at a level that you and I are speaking to a young person. That's beneath you. And climbing is this massive equalizer for them, because old, young, professional, rich, poor, doesn't matter. They all have to rely on each other for the distribution of information and the climb. And it's probably the only no, correction, it is, from what I understand, from what they've told me, the only sport where all these peoples from different classes are getting together and they're sharing information. And that was something that was told a lot. They're like, we would never talk to these people, or we would never be in this situation. And here in America, it's like, it's so different. It's like, well, everybody rock climbs, whether you're a doctor or this. Yes, the only difference is, do you own a Sprinter or a Ford Aerostar or a Chevy Astro? That's the only real difference. But other than that, let's sit around the fire and sing Kumbaya. And so I do think this is helping strengthening bonds and building new intersectionalities within their community and within their culture. So I think the biggest thing that I took home from all of this is like, it is not about the rock climbing. It is about the people who are in this and in the room with you and in the space with you, and understanding that, like, that's what matters in building these relationships, because that's the only way that the sport as a whole grows, we as a community grow. And I have the privilege to watch that at a very, 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 very infant incubating level. Like, it's like, it's like, the best way I know how to describe it, I think it's like watching, watching the birth of climbing in that country. I think I'm like watching someone 3 weeks being pregnant. It's like, I don't know what an elephant's pregnancy gestation time is, like, what, 2 years or something. And it's like, I feel like I'm just now watching the embryo beginning to grow. And it's like, I feel compelled to make sure that this child, no, that's wrong. I feel compelled to make sure that this community has all the resources that they can possibly have, because for the first time in my life, I am in a position where I have more resources than a majority. And it just boggles my mind, because that's not the way it is here. I don't have more resources. I'm very blessed to have wonderful parents who work really hard and provide and give me resources and to do things. But knowing that my resources are much more in a country that's, one of the poorest within the top 10, top 15 poorest countries in all of Africa, and knowing that, I can help, and knowing that this might be helping them knock out of that, is something that's so important to me. Just out of curiosity, just because I forgot you were doing so much development in Mexico, where, you mentioned that, this really reminds you of the work that you're doing in Mexico. How so? And what are you actually doing down there?
I mean, I think kind of in your last point of the resources that we have, I think as Americans that we think are normal, you go to another country and then you realize actually most of us who maybe identify as middle class here are rich when you go to another country.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I do more actually bolt replacement than route development. I do some development in Potrero, but I think giving the way I choose to give back is to replace old bolts. And because it's a lot, it's very easy to get some stainless steel bolts from ASCA, who I've been working with, American Safe Climbing Association, who I've been working with for 20 years. It's it's just about getting them down there because ASCA supports. I think it's one of the only places outside the United States that ASCA supports is Potrero Chico,
Yeah.
and it's mostly Americans and Canadians that are climbing there, and then there's an awesome local community too. But yeah, then you realize you can give back, and I think like you're talking about the vibe in Malawi of almost that like communal spirit. I almost feel that more there than here. And there could be a lot of reasons too. I think that there's just a curiosity with another culture, that makes it interesting. And like I said, my girlfriend is Mexican too, so I feel very like kind of connected and engaged to that culture, and more I feel part of it. But yeah, when you realize that it's quite difficult to get bolts there and replace, the old hardware, that now that we're doing that all over the world. I just think it's such an easy way to give back, and then yeah, you feel embraced, you feel at home in another culture, which is just amazing. And but yeah, I think that just that concept of we have so many resources here in the United States, and then spreading some of those resources out throughout the world is just through the medium of climbing is just a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, I like how I like that. I like that you resonate with that experience and you resonate with that feeling so much, because I think, I don't know, I think most climbers don't experience that. And if some of them do, they feel it, they experience on a church camp missionary weekend style, where like they just kind of go do a thing and leave. And it's just like I didn't know you've been like going down there and really just kind of committing to this for a long time. And, I mean, I think that kind of even makes sense more why you and I have always vibed on a particular level. It's like, once you kind of dig your heels into something and you're like, I want to see this done well, like you kind of have to follow it through. And and if you don't follow it through, I don't know. I can speak for both of us when I say it, but like, it just eats at me knowing that like, if I just chose not to follow through and not to do this, it would just eat at me to the point where it's just like I could go on through the rest of my life and do whatever I want, but there would always be this hollowness. And I want to live a full and fruitful life. I want to live a fabulous and lavish life. I want to live an abundant life. And I have found that abundant, fabulous lavishness is made by the connections that you have, not by the money. Don't get me wrong. Money's great. Allows you to do a lot of cool things. But like, you can bury it with you, but some grave robber's just going to come and take it along the line sometime later. And so I think that's just, I don't know. I think that's like really, I love it that you're doing that. I didn't know that you're doing that. And then if you ever need help by any means, please let me know.
Dude, it sounds like before we turn the mics on, you're going to be in the Monterey area.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be there too. And I'm
going to be in El Salto a lot.
But I'll roll up, man.
Yeah.
I'll be in, I'll roll up. That's just on the other side of the city.
We should definitely do it. But even then, dude, I'm in Texas, so I'm far. For those of you who understand, Texas is huge. Like, everyone's like, why don't you go to Waco, Texas? It's 10 hours from Dallas. I think it's like it's close. It's easier to drive from here to Waco Tanks in Lander, Wyoming than it is to drive from Dallas to Waco Tanks. And I know, like, some of you are like, what? And immediately Googling on your phone right now. But it is easier driving by far. But I would love to come down and just like help out and go for a weekend and like just put the work in. I've been doing some rebolting through in different parts of Texas, and then I've been helping Nate and them like service bolts to guys that I know that have small private crags, and they're not privately owned crags, they're public access crags, but I've been like helping distribute some of the hardware around and making sure that they are that the stuff is just good for people. And so but once again, if you ever need a hand, I'm in this like nice little cush where basically until this time next year, I can give like a weekend or a week or so, just to slide on down and help. And I would love to if you need any.
Let's do it. I don't know if you noticed, but in El Salto, there was a big hurricane that all this water moved through. So one of several of their classic routes, and there's this local group called Escalada Libre out of Monterey.
I've heard of them.
If you want to meet I haven't connected with them too much, but they seem very on it, very passionate, and they had to, like, some of the roots dropped by 3 meters on the Los Animas wall, so
Oh,
they had
wow.
to rebolt because of the erosion from the hurricane waters.
So they're taller now.
So they're taller now and harder, I think. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow.
So.
Oh, that's like that one place in Idaho. I forget where it was that there's like apparently like when the farmers are farming, they let all these waterways come through so they can irrigate their crops. But there's this like little teeny canyon where the boulders get taller and taller because every time it erodes. So it's like the opposite of that. Dude, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm happy we finally had a chance to do this. We've been kind of bouncing around, and I would love to do this again. And definitely, I think we definitely went more my style. I like to just kind of free file and chat, but I would definitely love to.
Yeah. Sorry if I.
No, I love
if I like we didn't know we were gonna do it. I don't think we're good at the structure. Like, I think Steven and I did 30 minutes and then 30 minutes like on it. Maybe that's both of our personality styles, but I just wanted to hear about what you're into, and I think that took up a lot of time. So hopefully I didn't like take over the interview, but I think you have a lot of interesting things to say. And like you said, we've been trying to do this for a while. So yeah. And we'll do it again.
Yeah. I'm all about, as long as we're getting on the mics, that's all I really
Maybe
care
we'll do it in
about.
Mexico.
Yeah, dude, I would love to. I'd love to. Hopefully my Spanish is better by then.
Sí, practicar, mi amigo.
Yeah. Well, I know what you're saying. All right. Well, dude, thank you for coming, and I look forward to doing this with you again. And I think the work that you do and the service that you provide for the community is by far the most unique thing. And so I just want to thank you for that, man. And thank you for being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me of that stuff. I think one thing for me is we all do our work in somewhat in there's times where we do our work in isolation, and getting out there into the world. I mean, that's why I'm here in Lander. That's why I come to the Climbers Fest. It's like to see the work that you do reflected into the world. I think all of us as artists need to have that real life stuff more than we do this isolation work. And I know that the isolation part, I always have to come out of that and get out into the real world. And and I appreciate what you do too, and I love talking to you. And like I said, maybe we should just have our own podcast someday.
Well, if you enjoyed this and you think Luke and I should have our own podcast, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinion. I don't know if the world wants to hear me talk. I know I don't want it anymore, but I've just got too much to say, so we're just going to go for it anyway. Thank you so much for listening to Sends and Suffers podcast. Please check us out on Patreon. Check us out on YouTube, Instagram, all the things. You can also look up me individually, Mario R. Stan on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. And, well, I guess it's the age-old question that I always like to ask. If you're not suffering, I mean, are you really even sending at all?